Was Caesar smarter than modern generals? I will prove this with a story studied as the pinnacle of military tactics. How did Caesar willingly walk into a trap and emerge victorious, destroying an army 6 times his size? This was an impossible mission with zero margin for error. How did he do it? Why did Caesar build walls around a city that was already besieged? All of Gaul had risen against Rome. The local tribes united under a young chieftain. He was a smart commander. Instead of large battles, he chose guerrilla warfare. He attacked supply convoys, burned Roman provisions, and set ambushes. Caesar understood that this would cause his army to simply vanish. He needed to force the Gauls into a decisive battle. But how? The Gallic chieftain moved his army into the fortress of Alesia, perched on a high hill. It seemed he was now untouchable. But this was exactly what Caesar needed. Instead of fruitlessly chasing the enemy across all of Gaul, he got what he had dreamed of, the chance to force a decisive battle. However, on terms that would have horrified any other commander. And the sight that greeted him at the walls of Alesia was truly terrifying. Imagine this picture. Caesar has only 60,000 legionaries, and right in front of him, on an impregnable hill, in the fortress of Alesia, sit 80,000 barbarians. He already has more enemies than his own soldiers. And that's only half the trouble. Caesar knows for sure. A second army is on its way. Another 250,000 warriors. Any other commander in his place would have given the order for an immediate retreat. But not Caesar. Instead of retreating, he orders his soldiers to dig, to build, to erect walls under the constant risk of being attacked. It looked like pure madness. He began to surround the fortress of Alesia with the first ring of fortifications. 15 kilometers of solid walls, towers, water-filled ditches. It seemed, why? To besiege those who are already sitting in the fortress? But this was the first level of his genius plan. This inner wall was not just a siege. It was a lock on the door. It sealed tens of thousands of barbarians tightly inside their own fortress. They could not take a single step without running into Roman fortifications. But that was only half the plan. While some legionaries built the first wall, others began constructing a second, an equally powerful 15-kilometer line of fortifications, but facing the other way towards the field from where the hordes of reinforcements were expected. This outer wall became a shield from the entire world. And here is what resulted. Imagine this: Caesar's sandwich. Inside the first ring, the trapped 80,000 Gauls. Outside the second ring, the arriving 250,000-strong relief army. And between these two walls, on a strip of land, 60,000 Romans. Caesar had voluntarily led his army into a mousetrap between two fires, but the situation inside the fortress was becoming critical. The situation in Alesia was becoming desperate. For 80,000 people warriors and local inhabitants, there was practically no food left. Hunger was turning the impregnable fortress into a stone coffin. And then the young Gallic chieftain made one of the cruelest and most tragic decisions in military history. He ordered everyone who could not fight to be expelled from the city. Women, children, the elderly. They were driven out of the gates in hope of Roman mercy. The logic was ruthless but clear. Either Caesar would let them through, take pity, and feed them. And then the Gauls inside would have a chance to hold out longer on the saved bread. Or the Romans would kill these people, which would demoralize their army and paint Caesar as a cruel tyrant. Either way, the besieged stood to gain something. But Caesar thought in terms of total war. He understood that any weakness, any show of pity, was a step towards defeat. Letting these people through meant allowing the enemy to conserve strength and prolong the siege. Accepting them into his own camp meant giving the last supplies to strangers and dooming his own soldiers to starvation. And he gave his terrible order: let no one through. Thus, the unfortunates, exiled by their own and not accepted by the others, found themselves in no man's land, in the narrow ring of death between the Roman walls and the walls of Alesia. For a week, they lived under the open sky, without shelter or food, under the indifferent gazes of both their own people and the Romans. Their cries and moans were heard on both sides of the fortifications. This was not just a humanitarian catastrophe. It was psychological torture for both sides. For the Gauls in the fortress, it was an act of desperation that turned into a moral defeat. They watched their families slowly die and could do nothing. For the Roman legionaries, it was a demonstration of the unwavering will of their commander, who was ready to do anything for victory. It was a horrifying, yet coldly calculated move. Caesar understood. To break the will of an entire people, sometimes you must look their suffering in the eye and not flinch. However, the main test of his genius plan was still ahead. A plan in which almost no one believed anymore. And then, after weeks of exhausting waiting, it happened. On the horizon, like a storm cloud, appeared that very relief army. A huge, countless Gallic host up to 250,000 men. The ground rumbled under their steps, and their war cries merged into a single deafening roar. Now Caesar had 60,000 against 330. The enemy outnumbered him more than fivefold, and the Gauls, confident in their might, didn't hesitate. They fell upon the Romans from both sides simultaneously. From the fortress, like an enraged beast, burst the army of Vercingetorix, desperately storming the inner fortifications. And from the outside, the fresh, full-strength horde began furiously pounding the outer wall. The Romans were caught in a steel vise, squeezed between a hammer and an anvil. It was utter hell. The legionaries had to fight on two fronts, literally torn between the two lines of defense. They rushed around the camp, under the whistle of arrows and stones, repelling assault ladders first on one wall, then on the other. The attacks did not stop, day or night. The soldiers had not a minute for sleep, not a second for respite. The forces were too unequal, and the Roman defense was cracking at the seams. It seemed that one more such onslaught, one more furious assault, and this fragile wall of discipline and courage would collapse, burying under its wreckage the last hope of Rome. The outcome of the entire Gallic War hung by a thread, and this onslaught was not long in coming. The enemy, having studied the Roman fortifications, finally found their Achilles' heel. It was there, on the northern slope of the hill, that the Gauls found the Achilles' heel of the Roman defense. Due to the difficult terrain, the legionaries could not erect full walls and towers there, leaving only a palisade and a shallow ditch. This is exactly what the Gallic command decided to exploit. Under the cover of night, when the Romans were exhausted from endless attacks, the best of the best moved forward elite warriors for whom the concept of retreat did not exist. The silence of the night was torn by wild cries, and a veritable whirlwind of bodies, swords and shields crashed down on the weak section of the defense. An incredibly fierce battle ensued. The Gauls, inspired by the proximity of victory, pushed forward, disregarding losses. The palisade was broken, the ditch filled with bodies. It already seemed that at any moment, the avalanche of barbarians would break through into the heart of the Roman camp. The legionary line wavered, and a wave of panic was ready to overwhelm the defenders. And at this very critical moment, when the fate of the entire battle hung in the balance, Caesar did what no one expected, neither his soldiers nor especially the enemy. He did not give orders from a safe headquarters. Instead, he himself jumped on a horse, grabbed a shield, and, donning his bright purple cloak, a symbol of supreme power, visible from afar, personally led the last reserves into battle. Those few cohorts he had kept as his very last hope. And he appeared, like a ghost emerging from the chaos and smoke in the very inferno of the battle. The crimson cloak billowed behind his back like a banner. His figure, fearless and resolute, was seen by all, both the retreating Romans and the triumphant Gauls. For the legionaries, it was an electric shock. Their general, the dictator, the man on whom the fate of the empire depended, was here, with them, sharing their mortal danger. And for the Gauls, this sight was both a shock and a challenge. The main prize of the entire war was now standing just a few dozen paces away, taunting them with its seeming accessibility. Caesar's appearance in the very epicenter of the bloody carnage had the effect of a bombshell. The Romans, exhausted to the point of death, seeing their invincible commander, who breathed the same air and shared the same mortal danger, took heart. Their desperate whisper, "Caesar is with us," quickly grew into a thunderous battle cry. The wavering line solidified once again into an unbreakable wall, and the Gauls, who had already tasted victory, found themselves, to their astonishment and horror, thrown back by a furious counterattack. But Caesar's genius lay in the fact that he never relied on impulse alone. While his personal presence stabilized the front, he gave a quiet, pre-arranged order. Through specially built and carefully concealed gates in the outer wall, Roman cavalry poured out his last trump card, fresh and unused in the night's slaughter. They did not skirmish on the flanks, but executed a deep envelopment and fell upon the rear of the huge relief army. It was a shock, a complete and absolute surprise for the barbarians. Seeing clouds of dust and gleaming armor behind their backs, the Gallic warriors came to the only possible conclusion, as it seemed to them. An entire legionary reinforcement had broken through to Caesar. The panicked rumor, "We are surrounded," swept through their ranks faster than any avalanche. The relief army, which had just been pressing with numbers, wavered in an instant, and then, seized by animal terror, turned into a disorderly flight. From the high walls of Alesia, this picture was visible as if on the palm of their hand. The barbarians, emaciated by hunger and battle, watched as their last hope dissolved on the horizon in a cloud of dust. A deathly silence fell over the fortress, more eloquent than any cries of despair. They had fought to the end, but there was no end anymore. Only hopelessness. The next morning, the young chieftain, clad in his finest armor, rode out alone from the gates of Alesia. He rode through the Roman camp, dismounted before the dais on which Caesar sat, removed his weapons, and silently laid them at the feet of the victor. Thus ended the great siege of Alesia, and with it, the dream of a free Gaul. His double walls turned the Gauls' numerical superiority into their weakness. While some legionaries held back the garrison of the fortress, others fought the relief army. And when the enemy wavered, Caesar's cavalry delivered the decisive blow. The victory at Alesia is a triumph of tactics over numbers, of intellect over brute force. Roman discipline, engineering, and the leadership of a commander triumphed where any other would have been doomed. So, was Caesar smarter than modern generals? The story of Alesia is not just an archaic example. It is a textbook case of risk management, logistics, and tactical genius. Write your opinion in the comments.